This is the SEO Mindset podcast with your hosts, Sarah McDowell and Tasmin Suleiman. This podcast is for SEO professionals, and each week, with the help of our wonderful guests, we discuss the important stuff that actually affects our careers and progression, but sadly often doesn't get talked about. You know, the invaluable soft and interpersonal skills that are often taken for granted, such as the skills we need for listening, time management, communication, and more. We also talk about the big issues that affect us and our careers, such as burnout, imposter syndrome, self-belief, saying no, plus other big issues and obstacles. With this podcast, we want to share knowledge on topics that unlock our listeners' true potential and enhance not only their careers, but all parts of their lives. So, are you ready to prioritize your own personal growth and career development? Then let's crack on with this week's episode. Hello, and a very warm welcome to the SEO Mindset podcast, where your hosts are myself, Sarah McDowell, and my wonderful friend and colleague, I don't know why I went with colleague, but I've said it now, Tasmin Suleiman. Thank you for joining us for another episode, and I'm very excited because I have a cracking guest joining me. So we have no Tasmin, but we have an Alex Harford. So Alex is a technical SEO consultant and mentor working for Salience, an SEO and marketing agency based in Chester in the UK. In 2023, Alex created a Technical SEO Academy and coaches new starters at Salience. So with his background, so what we're going to be talking about today is learning SEO from trusted resources. Now, before I get Alex onto the podcast, just a reminder of how you can support me and Tasmin. So if you enjoy what we're doing, there's two ways that you can support us. You can head on over to our Buy Me a Coffee page. We'll put a link in the show notes, and there you can give us a one-off donation, which we'd be very much appreciative of. And you can also share. So we ask everyone that we can to help spread the word of the SEO Mindset podcast. So the next time you're listening to an episode and you're like, this will be really good for such and such a person, share that episode with them, find that link and share it over WhatsApp, Messenger, say it in person, just help us get the word out. Right, let's get Alex onto the show. Hello, Alex.
Hello.
How are we doing?
Not too bad, thanks. I've got a bit of a cold today, but I think I'll be able to get through the podcast just fine.
Thank you for soldiering on, and thank you for coming onto the podcast. Very, very excited to talk about this topic. And with your illness, because obviously you were talking beforehand that you were not feeling the best, maybe that will work well because, husky podcasting voice, bit croaky.
Who knows? I mean, I think like most people, I don't like the sound of my own voice. So I don't know, maybe I'll listen back to it and think, oh yeah, that did sound good.
I don't think anyone likes listening to their own voice. And I remember talking to a voice coach one time, and it's because you hear your voice differently. So when you're talking every day, because of like you're inside your body, which is a weird thing to say, but obviously it's going to sound different when you hear a recording. So because it sounds different to what you hear day in, day out, you're like, oh, I don't like that. But yeah. Right. So today's topic is how to learn SEO from trusted resources. A very important topic. Very important topic for our audience. So to kick us off, what does the term trusted resources mean and why is it important?
To me, it's an author or publisher I've come to trust over time. So I think Moz would be a really good example. I've read Moz. It was called SEO Moz when I started in SEO and used its tools for over 15 years. I'd say SEO Mindset as well. It's become a trusted resource for me because you and Tasmin speak from personal experience, as do your guests. So from listening to your podcasts, sort of learning about you both through that, I can tell you're coming from a good place. So that trust branches out into other things you could do. It doesn't have to be career related or SEO related. So if I think of one of my hobbies, I really enjoy hiking, and there are certain brands of map and hiking guidebooks that I've come to trust over the years, because if I don't trust them, or if there's something wrong in one of those guides or maps, it could put me in a dangerous position when I'm out in the mountains or the wilderness. So yeah, it's just something that we've come to trust, I'd say. And I sort of imagine most of us have got at least a few trusted sources, whatever the topic. So video game reviews could be another. There are a couple of websites I trust for video game reviews, because they kind of align with what I think about games, and they seem to pick up on sort of the negatives that perhaps I wouldn't like in games. Like if a game is sort of wasting your time, I sort of hate feeling like that. So yeah, I think they're just resources that we've come to trust over the years. And yeah, why are they important? Especially online, there's so much misinformation, outdated content, biased content. There's a massive extra influx thanks to all this generative content from the likes of ChatGPT and so on that people are just spamming online. So it's really difficult to know where to look and who to trust. I'd say especially for new SEOs, but a lot of experienced SEOs too, myself included. So if there's a topic I don't know much about, sometimes I can find it quite overwhelming trying to find the sort of the right information and figure out whether I can sort of trust it. And we've got our own biases as well. So cognitive biases or shortcuts that our brain uses to try and make our lives easier, and they can affect our perceptions of content and lead us to trust in content that perhaps we shouldn't. So yeah, I think so. With that kind of knowledge, I think it's especially interesting from how our brains work. It can help us figure out sort of who and what content to trust. So if I sort of mention from my own perspective at Salience in creating that Technical SEO Academy that you introduced me with at the start, I could have just provided a list of trusted sources for sort of new SEO executives that start. But I thought rather than someone relying on a list of just resources I give to someone, whether it's people or publishers, if I sort of give people the knowledge on figuring out how to find their own trusted sources and what they can trust, I think that sort of prepares people much better for the future.
And I suppose a big thing that I was learning when I was new to SEO is, yes, it's you need to know what trusted resources are and where you can find them, but you also need to think, okay, it's when it comes to SEO, it's not always a one size fits all, and not everything that you read is going to be verbatim, or like things that you read online, their advice coming from someone's particular experience or someone's particular, they've been working on a project or how they found it. So I think, yes, trusted resources is important and knowing where to go to, but it's how you take that information in as well. So for example, it took me a while to sort of, okay, once I'm learning something or I've been asked to do something that's new, or I'm trying to implement something that's out of my comfort zone, rather than just taking it for verbatim from what I've read, is testing it and trying it out for yourself as well.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. If there's anything that we can do to try things ourselves, then yeah, it's. I mean, I feel quite lucky. The fact I used to be a web developer before I was in SEO, and sort of kind of accidentally got into SEO. And while I say it's not necessary for SEOs to learn how to code, I do think it's a really good advantage if you sort of have your own website and you can try some of these things out yourself and sort of build up a bit of a knowledge base in your head of what's worked and what hasn't worked.
Exactly. Because then until you've tried something out for yourself, and it might be different because all websites are different, aren't they? All websites have their own issues. All websites have their own challenges, and you just need to try stuff out and see what happens, don't you?
Exactly, yeah. I mean, it's a good example mentioning other websites, because I have some clients I work with who they'll look at perhaps the biggest sort of name in their industry, and they'll want to copy what they do on their website. And the website might have a really bad navigation, and it might be really difficult to find the products that you need. But because they are ranking, sort of, I don't know, first or second for these major keywords on Google, a lot of people think, well, we should just copy what they do. But no, they are perhaps ranking up there because they're such a big brand. You've got a lot of high street brands in the UK, and they've got that history. So even if the website's really poor, I won't mention any names, they can still rank up there sometimes with some sort of really bad sort of SEO on the website. I mean, there will be things on the site that are good. But yeah, so yeah, I think always think about those things critically, and if you can, just try them out yourself on your own website.
So, and going back to sort of when we're reading and we're learning from like resources that we find online, is there ways that you can think more logically when you're considering information? Is there like strategies and tactics that you can implement there?
Yeah, so I mentioned cognitive biases, didn't I? So they are ways our brain tries to simplify things to make our lives easier. So, for example, some of us might commute to work the same way every day, and there'll come a stage where we'll just do most of that commute on autopilot, and we might not even remember it. Things like driving a car or riding a bike, playing a certain piece on a musical instrument, it becomes second nature with practice. So they're sort of beneficial ways our brain makes things easier for us. So, we don't have to think as much, and we don't have to use as much brain power. But those shortcuts the brain makes can sort of cause us issues sometimes as well. So yeah, there's quite a lot of cognitive biases. There's sort of 5 I sort of think are worth mentioning today. So when we're looking at content, so content can be anything, just video, a tweet, or whatever they are called these days, or an article. And one of the cognitive biases is we're more likely to believe people we see as authority figures. So the CEO or head of a company, for example, we're more likely to believe what they say, whether it's right or wrong. If I put it to the SEO industry, I'll pick on John Mueller. I think he's great for the poor John. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, sure he won't mind. But yeah, I think he's great for the industry as a whole. But because he's sort of the main public face of Google, and Google is by far the biggest search engine in the world, we'll sort of look at anything he posts, like I said, whether it's a tweet or something else. And because he works for Google, we might just think, oh, that's gospel. We sort of just believe what he says because he's got that authority that he works for Google. And that's actually called authority bias, where we might believe whatever he says. So I do think sometimes SEOs will take things he says too literally. So I don't know if you might have mentioned bold text at some point, and then you got a load of SEOs who started bolding bits of text in the content, just to try and rank better in Google. But if you sort of think about it logically, well, does the bold text help the reader to read the content? So authority bias is one of the big ones, I'd say.
Yeah. And I definitely, I can see myself falling into that trap, because there's people that you look up to, or there's people that you aspire, especially because I've been working in SEO for around 10 years. I think it's over 10 years now, which kind of goes to like show my age a little bit, maybe not. But yeah, there's definite people that I would have taken because I've got respect, or I see them as authoritative or knowing. You do just take things for verbatim, and then you just do them without testing or actually trying it out first. So, for example, with the bold text, maybe you wanted to do maybe a better way of dealing with that situation is you read that advice from John, but rather than spending all your time and efforts adding bold text to all the pages or your important pages, you take one page, you do the thing that's been suggested, and then you measure it, right? And then you see, okay, is it worth my time and resources to implement on other pages?
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, I would always think from a usability perspective. I never think an SEO change should make user experience worse. So I would always
100%,
just look
no.
at, yeah, I would always just look at it and think, is this making the content more difficult to read?
Yeah.
You can maybe bold little bits of text here and there so people can scan, scan a bit easier when they're looking at content. But some people just went way over the top and just started bolding, I don't know, a couple of
Everything.
words in every sentence and that sort of thing, and it just didn't read very well at all.
But that's it, isn't it? So part of SEO, it's not just about ranking in Google, is it? Or getting traffic to your pages. It is about user experience, because Google cares about their users at the end of the day. We've also got things like eat. I always feel silly saying that because they always add on new E's, don't they? But I suppose whatever advice that you're given, just make sure that you test it first. And when you test it, don't just test it to see if it ranks better or you get more traffic. There's other things that you need to test as well, like your UX, usability. Like you said, with the bold text, for example, like what does that do for people reading and stuff? So always test, I think, is what we're saying. So learn, do your research, but always test what you find out.
Yeah, definitely, and think critically. Yeah, and also we all make mistakes, so everything John Mueller says isn't always going to be 100% correct, which is fine. We all make mistakes. I think as long as we learn from them, that's fine. So I think it's another thing to just accept that people will make mistakes, and we should always be kind when people do.
Exactly, we're all human. We're all human.
Yeah.
Until AI takes over, and then yeah, but that's another kettle of fish. Right, let's take a short break, and we'll continue with this topic after we're back with part 2. Hello everyone, Sarah here. Just want to give you a heads up that Google Podcasts will be discontinued at some point in the new year. If you are currently using Google Podcasts, don't fret. You can still listen to our episodes in lots of different ways. We're available on all the podcast playing apps such as Spotify, Apple, Amazon. You can also listen to episodes via our web player on our website. Loads of different ways. In the show notes, there'll be a link to our website and a link to all the directories where you can subscribe. Why should you subscribe? Well, you get notifications when new episodes are available. Hi, Sarah here from the SEO Mindset. Just a quick reminder that if you do enjoy the podcast and what me and Tasman are doing, you can support by donating as little as £5 to us via our Buy Me a Coffee page. Just head on over to the seomindset.co.uk/donate. There will be a link to that page in this episode's show notes. And also, we'd love it if you shared our podcast with others. The more listeners we get, we can continue to find awesome guests to join us for episodes and talk about important topics. So, the next time you are listening to an episode and think someone would enjoy, tell them. Open up the episode in your app, find the share button, and you will be able to copy the link to the episode and send it to them via WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, Slack. There's so many ways that you can help us spread the word. We are back with part 2. So we hope you enjoyed that short break. And yes, so in part 1 of the podcast, we were talking about the different biases that we had. And Alex went into detail about authority bias. So, Alex, is there other biases that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, there's I think 4 more. Probably mention if we've got time. So there's another called the bandwagon effect. So if an SEO tactic or something trends on Twitter or TikTok, for example, we're more likely to believe it just because it's trending. irrespective of who shares it. So it might not even be someone we think of as a trusted source in the SEO industry. We just see, oh, that's got hundreds of shares and likes and so on, and we're sort of more likely to believe it. Sort of another similar one to that is something called tribalism. So I imagine some people, even if they don't know about these biases, will sort of be guessing already what some of these are. And so if most of a peer group we're in believes something, then we're more likely to go with the tribe. So say, I don't know, we're in a group of 25 SEOs and say 20 of them believe that subfolders are better to have blog structures in rather than a subdomain. Then even if evidence is presented that says, oh, it doesn't make any difference, or a subdomain is better, we're just more likely to go with the tribe, the majority of those sort of 20 people.
Is that because I think as humans we don't want to stand out, do we? Or not that we don't want to stand out, but we want to fit in, or we want to
Yeah,
be
yeah,
part of a
yeah.
community, or we want to feel like we're part of something. So in that example, because talk about subfolders, subdomains, like you're more likely to go with what the tribe thinks because you want to be part of the tribe and you don't want to go against what the tribe's saying.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, in a way, it's kind of similar to authority bias as well, or
Yeah.
it sort of seems to me, I'm not a scientist, but yeah, we kind of believe in those people in authority in a tribe. Well, that's kind of authority in itself anyway, isn't it? Because there's a lot of
Yeah.
people who are believing that same thing. So another cognitive bias is called confirmation or reinforcement bias. So that means we might believe something, such as the output from a test or case study, because it's what we already believe. So if we already believe subfolders are better than subdomains for hosting blogs on, for example, um, and we see a study that says, oh yeah, subfolders are better than subdomains, we might not even look at that study properly. It just reinforces what we already believe. So we think, oh yeah, it's what I already believe. So we don't look at that critically because of that. And that can happen in our own testing as well. So we could interpret results as how we want them to appear. Sort of, I wouldn't necessarily say fiddling with the data, but data can be used to show different things, can't it? So kind of unconsciously, we could also run a subfolders v subdomains blog test, for example, and subfolders comes up, oh, that's better. But it might not be in the data that we have. So it's another good one to be aware of, I think.
Yeah, and I think when you're running tests or you're doing research or stuff, you're going to be looking for stuff to back up what you want it to back up, or you're going to
Mm.
be looking for reinforcement, like you say. And I've done that so many times, without sort of, okay, really testing or doing a test before and a test after. Because if you look for metrics that are going to help back up what you're saying, then of course you're going to find them, and vice versa. Like if you want data to back up that what you did before didn't work as well, then you're going to find that as well, aren't you?
Yep, definitely. Yeah, yeah. And
And
then,
yeah, what's is there any more? Is there any more
yeah,
biases?
so there are lots more, but I'll just mention one more. Miriam Jessia also has a video about cognitive bias when considering content. So I think we've both mentioned a couple of different ones, and she'll talk about it in a different way. So that's worth looking up. I can share the link to that for your show notes. Yeah, the final
Nice,
one
thank you.
I would like to mention is called the illusory truth effect. So that means we're more likely to believe something if we repeatedly see it talked about, even if it's not something we believed initially. So it could be an SEO myth. So there are lots of SEO myths out there, aren't there? So something like Google penalizes duplicate content is an SEO myth that many SEOs believe. And that could be because it's out there on the internet all over the place. So they could have just seen and heard that myth so much that they've started to believe it, even if perhaps their own testing shows that Google doesn't penalize duplicate content. I mean, of course, duplicate content can cause problems for a website, but Google don't penalize it.
Yes, and that's a so knowing the difference between it can hurt you compared to Google penalizing you is two different kettle of fishes, isn't it?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So I wonder who started that myth off then.
Well, perhaps I think Google did penalise duplicate content in the past. There was the Panda update, which targeted and that kind
Yeah.
of thing. So at some point, it was penalised, I think, but I don't think Google penalises duplicate content anymore. There are other ways it
Uh,
looks at websites for that kind of thing.
and that's just made me think that obviously Google is always changing how it does things, isn't it? It's always changing its algorithms. It's always changing what it's looking at. And I mean, it can be a bit of a nightmare for SEOs keeping up to date with everything that's going on. But that's a really good point, isn't it? So things in the past might have been the case, but things change, right? And I suppose that there's a question: how do you know, or how can you keep up to date with that kind of stuff? Like, so where it's recommendations that are outdated and then they're not around anymore. How can you keep up to date with that?
I'd say maybe look at the date the article was published. I don't know if that's too obvious an answer. It won't
Not at all.
always. It won't always be the right published date on an article, of course, but I think it's just keeping up to date. So seeing what people are sharing sort of more recently, looking at Google's official documentation, they do tend to be sort of quite good in putting the dates on their own documentation on when it was last updated. Um, so yeah, I think just all of these different biases we have, just thinking about them all and sort of thinking
Yeah.
about things more critically. I mean, it's kind of difficult because a lot of SEOs will share old content or will still say, Google penalizes content. So there are SEOs that still say that. So I think it's kind of the whole thing, just thinking of it as a whole and just being aware that something might be outdated. And
Mm.
again, asking other people, looking at a range of sources, don't just rely on one resource, just looking around and
And I suppose as well, this feeds back into what we are saying earlier. Is always like test stuff, and so once you've read something, rather than just taking it for gospel. So, say for example, we take this thing of like duplicate content as an issue because Google penalizes you. Like, if you read that before then being like, "Oh crikey, we need to." Work on all our pages, make sure that we've got no duplication, and we need to spend all our time and energy. Slow that process down, take a step back, because something that I've done is I'm a panicker, I'm a worrier, right? As soon as I read something and I'm like, oh, is that an issue? I jump straight into it rather than taking a step back, looking at the pages, because you'll know if Google's penalized you for something, won't you? And you can do some digging in Google Search Console. You can look at traffic, you can look at Screaming Frog, crawlers, can't you? Like, for that specific penalization, is that even a word? I've gone with it now.
sounds a
And
bit
you was
rude.
I know, as soon as I said it. And you said earlier that this was a trusted resource, Alex, and now I'm making up words. But yeah, like there's always ways that you can dig and find out first, rather than, because you don't want to panic other people in your company, you don't want to panic your boss, stakeholders. So take a step back first. And you don't want to waste time or resource, because there is only so much time that you've got in a working day, haven't you? Like, you need to prioritize. So you might put all your efforts into this one thing that you've read, when in actual fact it's not an issue and you could have spent it on something else.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a good thing to bring up as well. And we all are different personalities, aren't we? So if you are someone that jumps into things, then perhaps you are the kind of person that does need to think about things a little bit beforehand, a little bit more than maybe some other
Mm.
people will be. And that's just fine, isn't it? Because we're all different. So yeah. And I think another thing that helps is sort of consciously connect new information to things that you already know as well. So we've got knowledge in our head, haven't we? If we've been in SEO for a month or 10 years, we've got existing knowledge in our head from what we've already learned and what we already know. So a lot of the time you can connect that to, I don't know, something new to what you already know. I'm sort of trying to think of an example, but maybe if someone has said, oh, put all the keywords for your page in the URL,
Right.
But if you already know that content, written content stuffed with keywords is a bad thing, then you can use that knowledge to think, well, maybe stuffing all these keywords in a URL isn't a good thing either.
Yeah, and there's definite like experience that comes with this, isn't there, or your gut feeling. So, for example, I know if there's anything that's a bit suspicious or you're trying to game the system to rank, then that is not going to bode well in the long run. Like you might get some instant successes, but then over time like you might be caught out, or Google might bring out a new update that deals with that specific thing. But I think at the core, as SEOs, you know what you should be doing. And if there's anything that feels a bit iffy to you, or anything that makes you feel, oh, am I trying to game the system here? Chances are you probably are, right?
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. Yeah. And also just going back to what we were saying earlier about usability, SEO shouldn't make
Yeah.
usability worse. Yeah.
100%, 100%. And that's something that I always try and make sure that I'm always thinking about and relaying back to whoever I'm working with, is that like user experience is important. Like Google SEO should never get in the way of that. It should never hinder how someone views or like someone's experience of the page at the end of the day, should it?
Definitely. Yeah.
You don't want to turn people away. Right. We are running out of time, sadly. So there's a few questions that I want to squeeze in before we have to end. So, first question, Alex. Sum up the main takeaway from today's episode in one sentence, or I could give you two or three if you really need it.
Yeah, maybe two or three. Might have said this already, but I think when we're taking in new information, especially if there's a lot of information, it can be quite overwhelming. So I'd say when you're looking at content, whatever it is, just consider one of these cognitive biases at a time, and see if that reframes what you're thinking of the content. And eventually that becomes second nature, and you can maybe start looking at another cognitive bias you have. And it doesn't just help in SEO, I think it helps in life in general, any sort of content you're consuming. And sort of think about the author and publisher as well. We didn't go into that so much, did we? But sort of where they might be coming from. Like, a lot of websites that publish content have tools to sell, for example, but still publish
Yeah.
brilliant content. But you can sort of kind of think, well, are they pushing this tool too much? So yeah, and I think maybe to summarize, question everything, sort of not publicly, so don't go, just criticizing people online or anything, but in your own head, just sort of question things that are there, maybe sort of think the opposite, like,
Yeah.
how does that feel, thinking the opposite of what it says. So yeah, I think sort of be curious and question things in your own mind. And if you do have questions as well, I think ask people. So like children ask loads of questions, and then for some reason we stop when we're adults, don't we? So I still think if you're sort of questioning things in a respectful way and genuinely want to learn more about what the author has written about or the publisher, then I think that's fine, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. There's so many times on this podcast where like our inner child or like things that we used to do when we were younger gets brought up. Because yeah, it just applies itself, like especially with like confidence and all of that stuff, which is a lot of what this podcast is about. But you're right, we ask questions a lot when we're like younger because we're learning about stuff, and we need to carry on doing that, because you'll never get to the point where you're like, okay, I know everything. Because
Yep.
you'll never get there. And that's just because there's so much to learn about. Okay. What's the best piece of career advice you've ever received?
There's no piece of individual advice that stands out for me, but I'd say it's more about the personal relationships that sort of build up over time and the people I work with. So within that, there'll be lots of little tidbits of advice and, sort of really good support that comes from those people. So I'd more say the relationships over the years have been more important than any sort of specific piece of advice.
Nice, nice. So sort of like who you've got in your network and who you
Yeah,
surround
yeah,
yourself with.
yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm just about 10 years at Salience now. I did take a career break, so I had to take get away from him for a while. But yeah, some people I've worked with for 10 years, so it's really good relationships. I really appreciate. So yeah.
And relationships go a long way, don't they? And
Yeah.
connections. Okay,
Yeah.
last question. Bit tricky. It's going to be hard because out of
Yeah.
all the SEOs out there, I'm going to ask you to whittle it down to one. So, if you would recommend everyone listening to the podcast right now to follow one SEO person, who is that person, please?
Yes, I should have scattered more names in throughout the whole recording, shouldn't I? It's difficult to mention one, but the recent article I've read, I thought was really good, was by Jeannie Jones. So it was about entity SEO. I think there are a lot of good examples in there, about the kind of things we've been talking about today. So it sort of links to other sources. It shows examples in her biography, shows why she's a good person to write that article. So there are sort of examples actually in the article as well of why it's a sort of trusted resource. And I remember her Brighton SEO talk. I'm not sure if it was last year or the year before as well, on sort of structured markup. That was really good as well. So I think entity
Nice.
SEO is something that should be talked about a bit more in the SEO industry. So it's good that we've got Jeannie Jones to sort of give us these sort of brilliant articles, and there are a lot of good tips in her article as well. So I suppose
Awesome.
that's one to share for your show notes as well, I guess.
Yes. I was just going to say, we'll make sure that all of Jeannie's where to follow them is in the show notes. So we'll make sure that our listeners can get access to that. Well, Alex, I'm afraid to say that does bring us to the end of the podcast. Thank you so much. And this was such a valuable conversation. And I'm just going to have to get you back because I feel like there's a lot more that we can talk about or go in depth on. So watch your space, folks, because Alex may be back with us. Before we go, where can people find you? So if they want to carry on the conversation or they want to ask you questions or whatever, just say hi. Where are you?
I'm not the most active person on social media. I finally joined Twitter a couple of years ago, but then Elon Musk started ruining it. So I'm
Yeah.
Alex Harford SEO on Twitter. There's no T in Harford, sort of common misspelling. LinkedIn, you can follow me on LinkedIn. If you Google Alex Harford SEO, I will show up, at least for the time being. So yeah.
Nice. Well, I'll make sure that your links are also in our show notes and then people can find you. And yes, I would just like to remind you again, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, if you do enjoy what me and Tasman are doing with the SEO mindset and you want to support us, you can do that. You can give us a donation. So we have set ourselves up on Buy Me a Coffee, which is a platform that allows basically creators. So me and Tasman are a creator of podcasts. It allows people to accept donations from their listeners. So go and check that out. Link in the show notes. Thank you very much. And share. So if you have found, and I'm sure you found this episode with Alex so valuable, so helpful, so share it. Share it with your friends, family. If you've got pets, even share it with them. You never know. Uh, but yes, right, Alex, let's say goodbye and until next time.
Thanks very much for having me.
Goodbye.
It's been good fun. Bye.